Hello world, this is Lisa Friedrichsen, your friend and computer science professor from Johnson County Community College. I wanted to make one more short screencast for you to give you one more example of how you might improve the Wes Bos JavaScript30 exercises and earn a 20 out of 20 on those projects. So here's his third project, updating CSS variables with JavaScript. And basically what happens is we are restyling this image with the spacing around the image, with the blur, here I'm making it very sharp, and here I'm making it very fuzzy, and the base color using these controls. I'll go with blue. And so he's listening for changes of these controls with JavaScript and applying functions that then change the CSS. It's very exciting. Here's my solution. At first glance, it doesn't look like I've changed much JavaScript at all because I have basically the same idea. I've got a different picture, so I've got a little bit different content, and when I move my sliders on my inputs, I'm basically doing the same thing. I'm changing the spacing around the image, the blur of the image, and the base color of the border. So at first glance, it looks like I'm doing the same thing that he's doing, but I want to show you how I changed the code that was significant, because you might want to do the same thing in your exercises. Let's start with the HTML. Of course, I've got the standard comments here to document who I am and where I've adapted this code from. I've got my comment as to the new things that are involved in this project, such as the data sizing attribute, the type equals range, that's what creates these sliders, the input element with the type equals range. Let's look at that real quick. Here's our first one, the spacing input box. Here's the label for spacing, and then here's the input. And notice that type equals range is what creates this slider. It looks a little bit different in every browser, but it's a really cool input element. Also type equals color. Here we have on this base color the type equals color, and when I click that we get the neat color picker here, and we can change the base color of the border around the image. Okay, so I didn't change a tremendous amount on the HTML, but wanted to point out those cool things. In the CSS, again, I've got my comments on my documentation, the things that I've learned anew, my credits to JavaScript30, and also a credit to a document on this :root, the pseudo class, which basically means we are applying these rules to the entire document. Anything can use these CSS variables. And CSS variables start with --, so that may be a new concept to you. In this case, I decided to set my colors using the red, green, blue CSS function for red, green, and blue, --, spacing variable, and a --, blur variable. And then when I use those variables in the rest of my style sheet, I just have to surround that variable name with the var function. And so the great thing about this is I can use the --, spacing or --, base or --, blur variables throughout my style sheet. And if I decide to change the color, I just go up here into my root and change it one place, and then every other place where I've used that variable name would update. So there's quite a bit to learn just in the HTML and CSS here without even worrying about the JavaScript. But let's get to the JavaScript, and I want to show you what I updated on that. In the JavaScript, you'll notice as you're going through his examples that he likes to use things like arrow functions, JavaScript 2015, also called JavaScript 6 constructs that we may have not touched upon yet in class. And so one thing you might consider for your improvement is to simply rewrite his code using older, more traditional constructs. So his code was just basically these few lines of code, and he used arrow functions, and he used this cool handle update function, which is being called anytime these three controls change or the mouse moves. And I thought that was a lot to pack into just a few lines of code. So for my improvement, I decided to rewrite his handle update function. I'm going to comment that out and change them into three different functions so that I had a different function working on each of these controls. And that's what I did. And in addition, he's also very fond of these backticks, which basically just creates a string. I decided to write my functions just using a basic expression instead of using the backticks. Finally, he liked to use the this keyword, and instead, for me, I just used my good old friend document.getElementById to specifically point to the 3 different controls in the 3 different functions that I wrote. And then I called those 3 functions in a jumbo handle update function so that I could still use his existing event listeners to run all 3 functions every time one of these controls changed or the mouse moved. So what I'm trying to say is, if you're looking at the example and you see a construct that you are not familiar with, if you want to unpack that into a more traditional way of writing JavaScript, which is probably going to require more lines of JavaScript, that's absolutely fine too. That's exactly how you learn how this works. And the main thing is that we understand the code and we can unpack the code and we can always improve it and refactor it later. But we want it to work and we want to understand it. Those are the key things. Thank you.